Hey folks, it's Shane from Performance EV. Today we're going to start trying to fit our Nissan Leaf motor into our Porsche 911. Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Thanks so much for joining us. For those of you new to the channel, this is my project to put a Nissan Leaf motor into a Porsche 911. And today I'm basically going to stop procrastinating and take the first steps to actually fitting it. I spent the last few weeks just looking at how the motor might fit into the engine bay, and also, I guess, adjusting the motor by cutting off a lot of the unnecessary bits of metal that are needed for its normal place in the Nissan Leaf, to try and maximize my chances of being able to fit it. So today we're going to try and move that forward. We're going to get back into the engine bay of the Porsche and look at the two options that are now viable, because I have cut off the extra metal, and thanks to some of the feedback in the comment section, and then decide which one I'm going to go for and start trying to do the first steps of, I guess, mounting it within the engine bay. This process is going to take a little while, but we're going to get it started today. So yeah, join us and we'll head back into the engine bay. So first attempt putting the motor in the longitudinal position, so where we would need some sort of differential, small gearbox or something like that to take the power from the motor, turn in that way and send it through to the wheels, which are there. We're now getting a much better fit of this unit inside the Porsche gearbox tunnel. So all the areas where we were previously getting serious contact with the various mounts are no longer an issue. And if you actually look towards the back, what we're fouling on now is basically some of the pipes or cable channeling, so I'll need to remove those before I go too much further with this particular option. But the engine is fitting much better, and even it actually follows the line of the tunnel wall quite elegantly, so maybe that's a positive sign. It's still, I don't know if you can see, sitting relatively low compared to the rest of the motor, but I'm hoping once we get the these mounting points and that out of the way, then we can lift it up another few millimeters and see how we get on. So we're going to have to reroute the handbrake cable slightly, not hugely, just down by a few millimeters, but this is actually looking like a pretty good fit this way, even with a little bit of space to spare. So on the kind of angle down here, I don't know if you can see it, but we're at a much better height in terms of protecting the motor during driving and not having it hit off things, which is obviously very important. And we're looking pretty good. There's a bit of space for the cooling pipes and allowing them in, with space either side for anything that needs to go on there, and then the space up top would be very suitable for pushing the high voltage cabling through. There's even, there's plenty of points at which I could mount clips and that to keep everything nice and neat. So then this would be kind of the look we'd be going for if we were to use a differential. So this is an inexpensive one that I picked up off eBay. It's from a BMW. It's a 4.44 ratio, so not quite the 7:1, but not a 2.5 or a 3:1 that you see on some of the some of the cars these days. So it's designed for something relatively high revving. But essentially we'd be looking to mount the motor between the two rear seats. Then I'd need to make a coupling to go between the motor and the differential, and then we'd need to identify what changes need to be made on this side to get the some sort of drive shafts to fit between the two or to fit the two sides of the diff. In terms of space, this works. The big question is if I were to go ahead and put it in place, would it actually generate the type of power in the way I want it to? And to be honest, I don't know. I'm kind of intrigued to find out if I were to just get it up and running and then start just playing around with the settings and the software and see where we get to. The main worries here are basically the same ones as if I was using the Leaf drivetrain, is just around getting the drive shafts to work, so ensuring that something that makes sense fits there and that it can go into the Porsche fitting on this side. So I've cut some extra bits off the I guess the back of the motor, so the side where the wiring comes out, and that's allowed it to fit far more snugly into the space where the transmission used to go, which means it can push a good bit further back, and that will hopefully give us more space to work with in terms of getting it to couple up to any differential or anything like that. So in order to fully assess this approach, we need to start looking then at how we'd actually mount the motor. And I think doing it this way actually does give us quite a few options in terms of using some of the traditional mounts and then some things I'll have to build myself. So as some of you will have seen in the video where I removed the Porsche engine from this car, the stock mounts at the front are designed to hold just one point of the transmission, but where it actually connects to the body is actually a total of 6 points. So either side of the tunnel that has the coolant tubes and that going down on it, there are two bolts, and then slightly higher up into the tunnel here, a bolt goes into it there. So basically that allows the weight to be distributed across a slightly wider area of the car. So I should be able to use those mounting points, though probably not the original bracket, because it's not neat enough for my purposes to hold the motor in place. Basically to use the rear mounting points on the motor with something where this bracket used to be, and use that to connect it in place. And then looking at the other option for fitting the motor, which is to do it this way with the actual gearbox attached as well. The changes I've made have also helped here quite a bit. We've definitely been able to get the motor in further, but again, I don't think holding it this way is gonna necessarily work. There've been some great ideas in the comments about different ways I could approach putting this in upside down. So let's get the gearbox, hook it up loosely, and see what angles we end up with if we try and fit it that way. So what we're investigating here was a neat bit of lateral thinking from one of the comments in the comment section. Just something I hadn't really thought of, but it does make a lot of sense. Essentially running the engine in reverse. So what I've been looking at is what happens if the engines running the way it did in the Leaf, and that limits me to one particular orientation. With this idea, you're bringing the engine much further into what was, or the motor into what was the Porsche engine bay, but keeping the gearbox output. So still using the Leaf gearbox and having the outputs in line with where they should be for the as it was on the Porsche. And this was one I didn't consider because of things like the oil channels in the gearbox, but as was pointed out, there's always the option of running some sort of siphon pump and creating an inlet and an outlet somewhere in the casing to basically suck oil out of the side that has plenty of oil in it and pump it back into the area that doesn't have any. So in this case, the Leaf gearbox is really going to dictate where the motor will fit. So we need to look at where the drive is going to come out of and go out to the wheels. And I'm using a breaker bar here to kind of mimic a half shaft. That means that the engine or the motor is sitting a little bit further into the actual Porsche engine bay than I really considered previously. And that means it is coming up against this bracing bar that goes between the two sets of suspension uprights. So we're going to have to consider something there. I think looking at it at the moment, I don't know if I'll be able to use the original Porsche piece because it's quite deep. Obviously Porsche designed things to work for mass production and to fit in what they already had there, but I think we can potentially make something else work. The other option could potentially be to rotate the motor slightly and to make it fit and run a little bit higher while rotating it around the angle where the CV axles would go in. But if we look, in order to do that, we need to look at the other parts of the motor and how they actually interact with the rest of the car. So even with the large amounts of metal that we've managed to take off the motor so far, it's not giving me any extra position to kind of rotate it. So this is pretty much the position the motor is going to end up in. If I were to try and move it any further, it would start fouling with the car itself, which obviously we don't want to do. Which means that we do have some space at this point to have the bar running underneath the motor. I think the main thing that where it would foul would be the angle from the upper mounting point down to the lower one. So we'd need to create something ourselves out of kind of box tube of box metal or something like that, and find a way to connect it to both sets. With the modifications we've made to the motor, I do actually appear to have, I guess, two viable options for fitting the motor. If I want to fit it longitudinally and use another differential to transfer the power from the motor to the wheels, I can now actually get it far enough back into the tunnel that there's space to actually fit something like a differential. Likewise, if I want to use the Leaf gearbox differential, whatever you want to call it, actually with a bit of prompting and help from the comment section, I think I've now got a viable way to fit that as well. Again, by removing various bits of the motor, again I'm able to push it far enough back that it actually it seems to fit within the space. Both of these options are going to require a fair bit of fabrication on my part in terms of mounting the motor before we even get into the kind of gear, the axles and drive shafts and that sort of thing. So I think it's going to really come down to probably which one I can progress most quickly, and for me that's going to be fitting the motor as we see it here. So using it with the Nissan Leaf gearbox and Nissan Leaf half of a half shaft, quarter shaft I guess, to get the power out, and then mating that with the Porsche one on the way through. If I want to go down the other path, I'd have to buy, I'd have to find some way of coupling the Nissan Leaf to the differential, which people have done, but it can be a bit of a pain. And likewise, I'd have to figure out a new set of drive shafts to take the power from the differential out to the wheels. So I think for the sake of just wanting to get this car on the road and driving, I'm going to go with this option. I can start progressing in terms of building mounts, that sort of thing, without needing to get the gearbox fully tapped up. I can fill it up with oil and run it at least for a little bit, certainly enough to get initial tests done, without putting in a scavenge system to kind of get the oil to the right place. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. Plus side, we can also, it would seem, use the parking brake, so that's good. And yeah, so the next job really is just to get this situated where I want it, and to start looking at how we're actually going to mount it. So we had placed a bar here previously, just kind of held in place with a bit of wood. I think that will become a permanent feature and will allow me to effectively hang the engine on the various mounting points that we've got on either side, and then look to probably push something forward to meet up with where the original gearbox mount went. So there'll be quite a few things that need to be made here. The other piece we'll need to make is something to go between the two suspension uprights. I know I had said previously I didn't want to touch that, but I think for the sake of getting the car up and running, we'll put something in place. Basically the space between the lower part of the arms will be free, and can hold. We can put something in place there. It's really just the angle at which it's coming off the rest of the mount. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us. First thing I'm going to do is get some metal plates cut out and drilled, which will act as the mounting point with the motor itself. So I'm going to use as many of the mounting points that were part of the system in the Nissan Leaf, but using my own components. So first off is the piece that goes on the gearbox itself. I've got some metal plate outside ready to be cut, and it's really just a question of figuring out what dimensions to cut it at, and then we'll come back in and figure out where we need to drill holes in it. Alright, so now we need to get some holes drilled into this piece. What I'm going to do for it, I guess the two options. One is to try and create a template based on the motor and figure out how to do it there. But fortunately, I still have the original mounts that came with the unit. So what I'm going to do is basically place this onto the plate I've created and use it to provide the mount. Normally with something like this I'd use a hole punch, but actually these holes are pretty big and some of them are actually off center or not quite round. So I'm going to try something a bit different, see if it works. So I've got a can of primer here. I'm just going to spray it into the holes and hopefully that will give me something to work with. See if this worked. Not the prettiest, but at least I know where to drill the holes. So now that we've got these marked, I'm just going to punch a hole bang in the center of each one. And now we can drill out a pilot hole. There we go. One startings of a mounting plate. I'm quite pleased how that turned out actually. Yeah, it's a start. So now I've only got 2 more to do. So we've made a start on it. Started getting the bits together to build the mounts to put the engine into place. And I was going to do an outro now, but as I was walking around the back of the car, I noticed I noticed that the engine mounts that actually came with the Nissan Leaf aren't as big and unwieldy as I thought they were. And it got me thinking, given the new orientation that I'm going with, which is one I hadn't really looked at before, could we actually use those engine mounts again? I don't know. I think it might be feasible. Why don't we head back under the car and take a look? So here are 2 of the engine mounts that I'm talking about. So I've used them obviously to create the lightweight mounts that I was going to make, but now I'm wondering if that's really necessary. So let's go under the car and I'll show you why I'm thinking that. So when I was originally looking at how I was going to fit this, I really had this side of, I guess, the motor and gearbox unit. I was envisaging it being within the transmission tunnel, and that meant that I had very limited space either side, and that's where the engine mount or the motor mounts go. So one fitting on this side, one fitting on the other side, and they come out a bit of a distance. Because of those constraints, the space constraints, that's why I went down the idea of kind of some plate metal bolting directly onto this and then welding some box metal onto the plate and then to something that attaches to the body. But that was always going to be a compromise, and now just looking at where this is going to fit, because it's now outside of the transmission tunnel and into the engine bay, there's actually quite a bit of space here that we could potentially use. All of these pieces here are very static. They're solid parts of the car. So in theory, what we could do is we can use the existing Nissan Leaf mount and put it in place here. Now the question is then whether I'm just trying to attach something to the top of it to attach maybe to a bit of extra steel that I'll put in place, or if I'm actually going to find a way to have the original engine mounts with their dampening capabilities sit on some steel that's then connected to the body, and that then gives me almost Nissan production levels of support for this motor unit. So this is going to be something I'll investigate in the next video. I'll get these bolted on, get the motor into a position that I'm happy with, and then figure out how we would get these bolted into the framework that I'd need to put in place. So not the final solution, but I think this is a more sensible way forward, given that I now have the space than what I was originally envisaging with the plate and box steel. So that was another productive day. Maybe not quite in the way I was thinking about it. I was actually really happy that I managed to get a start on building the mounts. Getting the plates made up was going to be the first step in that, and then it's a question of trying to get some bits of metal to line up and welding things in place. But I'm glad that I went back into the engine bay even after making those, just to double check a theory. I'm still not 100% sure that those Nissan Leaf mounts are going to work, but I'm not seeing any major challenges. Yes, they take up a little bit more space than I was hoping to, but if they make my life easier in terms of already having something in place to dampen the vibrations or any vibrations that might be going through, I think that's actually a good thing. Saves me having to troll through catalogs to try and find a suitable engine mount to go with a custom fabricated mounting. So yeah, there's still a lot of work left to do on this, but I'm going to get those mounts properly bolted on, maneuver the engine into place, and then we can start looking at how we'll attach that to the car in the next video. So I hope you join me for that, and thanks so much for joining me on this video. If you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing. I hope that you're getting value out of these videos, or at least some entertainment. And yeah, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.